we get to we get to pick parts for this the Grinch / Tony the Tiger fix it fic. Now we are specifically this is a teen and up audience's fic, which is one of the only reasons I allowed it, because if this was actually explicit, it would be a big no from me, dog.
Yeah.
This is oh sorry.
No, I was just gonna say I would like to narrate it.
Absolutely. This is specifically the Grinch from the 2000s How the Grinch Stole Christmas movie, in case you're wondering how to visually depict this in your minds.
Not from the musical that was just released?
Apparently not. Apparently it's specifically the shitty little cartoon one, I think. Wait.
Yeah.
Wait.
I mean,
oh wait, no, that's not what I want.
I'm still gonna hear it in my mind as Jim Carrey Grinch.
41 works.
Oh, 2000 is the Jim Carrey Grinch? Okay, never mind.
Oh yeah, no.
2000.
Yeah, you specifically Jim Carrey. I specifically, this person wants you to think about furry Jim Carrey and Tony the Tiger. Okay.
Just before we begin, I would like to inform you that in the Kellogg's Frosted Flakes fandom, there are 10 fics.
Janaya, do you have your next rare pill?
5 of them. Half of them are explicit.
I'm not clicking on that because I'm live right now, but I do need you to know I'm gonna do that later.
People are apparently horny for the cereal tiger.
That does make sense. I'm just surprised people took the time to upload it to AO3. What character in either of these works is canonically autistic?
Grinch.
Probably. God. Additional tags are crack treated seriously. I've been using this fic as a threat for so long, and now I'm finally following through. Horrifying. Fix it. Let's see what else. Canon non-binary character. Again! Wondering where this is coming from, but sure, good. Canon autistic
the Grinch,
character.
Apparently.
I guess so. Canon autistic character, canon non-binary character, non-binary Grinch, bisexual Tony the Tiger, justice for Martha May. Yes, this is a furry fic. This person posted it a few days ago, a couple weeks ago, and finished it last week, or a week and a half ago. Or sorry, last update a week and a half ago. We're only reading one chapter of this. I don't even know if we're going to be reading more than one chapter, but
probably not.
Oh yeah, I remembered the reason that it takes place in the 2001 specifically is because that version of Grinch has 2 elderly lesbian mothers.
What?
Oh,
okay.
God, this is a... Why would you make your Tumblr theme... Okay, every time I listen to You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch, I can't help but sit there and think, what did the Grinch do to hurt you? Because dude just stands there for 2 minutes and 58 seconds and drags the Grinch into the dirt. He stole Christmas, Kayla! You stop with your not all Grinch's propaganda! You know what? If somebody told me I was a 3-decker sauerkraut and toadstool sandwich with arsenic sauce, I'd probably be bitter enough to steal Christmas too.
Hey, he's an anti-capitalist!
Yeah. Fucking oh my god here. Interestingly, though, The Grinch Who Stole Christmas is narrated by Boris Karloff. The big musical number is sung by the late Thurl Ravenscroft, an American voice actor better known as the voice of Tony the Tiger. My headcanon is that The Grinch and Tony the Tiger had a bad breakup, and You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch is the resulting breakup song. Did this really have to be the first thing I see when I open up Tumblr? Yes, and then there's a Guadamouth art, I have to presume. Can I see... Oh no, it's 2 images, okay. There's a picture of the Grinch drinking something in a can and saying, "You're a mean one, Mr. Grinch." And somebody responded with the Grinch saying, "You're great," and a picture of Tony. I hate this. Alright. I'm not reading the rest of this out loud.
I think that's probably for the best.
Yeah. Alright, okay. Who wants to be Tony and who wants to... Wait, who we have in here? We have the Grinch. I think we have Tony. I think Tony's the narrator. But we'll probably speak, and then...
Oh, it doesn't matter. I know who the narrator is going to be, and it's not Tony the fucking Tiger.
Okay, cool.
Janaya, I'm scared.
All right. Okay. Well, I think it's just narrator Tony and the Grinch. I can take Tony the Tiger's dialogue if somebody else will do the Grinch.
On one hand, I'm tempted. On the other hand, what the fuck?
Go for it. I'm gonna sit out the second one because I'm gonna be narrating this one. So
alternatively,
guess I'll
I
be the
could do the
Grinch.
Grinch and somebody else could be Tony. If that would be more amenable, I don't fucking know.
I don't think amenable is a factor in this.
Just embrace it. We've read a lot of really ridiculous shitfics on this thing.
It can't be worse than Equius's Christmas Quest.
That was actually pretty
Christmas
good,
Quest was
though.
great.
That was actually pretty good.
It was so fun.
Silly,
it was fun,
good.
but it was also terrible in a good way. I like
Right.
things like that.
All right, who's the Grinch? Who's Tony?
I guess I'll be Tony.
All right.
There we go. No.
Oh, did you post the link in the chat? I've been in the Discord. I mean, not the Discord, the Twitch.
No, I usually pull them off the card, but I can post the link. Hold on. Here you go.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I'm on a
was
phone.
trying
I
to-
can only have so many tabs open at a time.
All right, let me know when y'all are ready, and I will take the narration.
I'm sorry. I'm just looking at the screen. I'm trying to decide if that is going to be too distracting. Let me put it like there. All right, that's probably better. Okay, sorry. I've been experimenting with new stream setup stuff, and
Yeah.
I think that's better for showing who's talking without covering up the fic. Okay, all right, we good?
I think we're good.
We're good.
I'm Gucci.
All right. Every Who down in Whoville liked Christmas a lot, but the Grinch who lived just north of Whoville did not. The Grinch hated the noise and the mess and the waste. The Grinch regarded it all with no small distaste. The Grinch liked the peace and the quiet of being alone. The Grinch much preferred being all on their own. The journey to Mount Crumpet required a flight, a boat ride, a drive, wishing upon a star, 2 hours of snowboarding through the rudest kinds of snow, and finally a grueling uphill hike. Tony found it all rather nostalgic. He arrived a week after receiving the Grinch's letter. Breaching the summit, he was greeted by the strangest of sights. The Grinch was wearing some sort of military coat with tassels and buttons on top of what appeared to be a kilt, but was maybe just a tablecloth. This wasn't unusual for the Grinch, who enjoyed costumes and generally behaving however the hell they pleased. What was unusual was the small assortment of tiny Who children lining up in front of the Grinch, none of whom looked particularly terrified.
Who did we decide was doing
You're
the Grinch?
you're the Grinch.
Yeah,
Okay. Attention!
Howled the Grinch, and the children straightened up. They were all holding misshapen piles of things, gangly oozits and assortmajigs. Then the Grinch lifted a baton, which was actually a repurposed coat hanger. And Tony realized with horror that the thingamawats were instruments, which the children somehow intended to play. He got his paws over his ears just in time. The thing about Who's, Tony knew from experience, was that they were not musically talented. Unfortunately, they were absolutely musically inclined. That is to say, they very much enjoyed making noise, and they were not discriminating about it. Tony had spent many a night by the Grinch's suspiciously smelling fireplace, drinking suspiciously tasting hot chocolate, trying to enjoy what would be an otherwise peaceful evening, if not for the utter pandemonium of whistles and shrieks seeping through the cave walls. It was the Whoville Christmas marching band, the Grinch explained, with a very dead look in their eyes. They practiced once a week, all year round, but in December, they practiced every night for hours. Tony had sort of understood why the Grinch wanted to destroy everything that Whoville stood for after that. Sort of. Because the thing about the acoustics of Whoville geography, well, they were very good, which to the occupants of Mount Crumpet right next door was very, very bad. That was years ago now, but people who have witnessed the horrors of war never truly forget. Tony wrapped his paws around his ears and ducked out of sheer instinct. Ducking wouldn't actually help, but it made him feel better. And the children started playing. It was not actually like any sound Tony had heard before. It was sort of like glass, tinkling. Actually, Tony thought, looking at one of the little Who girls with her enormous Who hairstyle, it probably was glass. She seemed to be blowing into a glass jar woven through with lots and lots of glass tubes, from which dangled odd bits of shards and metal. It was rather pretty. The sound was much more gentle than anything Tony would have expected the Who's to produce. Not particularly musical, perhaps, but light and interesting. Tony, who remembered the long nights of whistles and bells and trumpets and drums, decided it was quite an improvement. Yes, he'd take it. The Grinch was conducting wildly this whole time, strutting around and waving their arms. They had 2 coat hangers now, in a tempo that wildly mismatched the actual music. They looked overall very bossy, very pleased with themselves.
Bravo!
The Grinch cried, with a voice like old nails. They strutted back and forth as they spoke like a teacher pleased with the class.
Remarkable! Excellent job! Truly astounding! The flair! The performance! L'art dramatique! I've outdone myself, truly!
Then the Grinch turned sharply to the children.
As for you!
They waggled a waggly green finger. The children inexplicably giggled. The Grinch sniffed long and hard, sounding a little like a very alarmed cat.
Adequate, I suppose.
The children, bizarrely, again. The Grinch was about to go on, presumably to explain to the children exactly how adequate and marginally passable and suitably lackluster they were, when Tony let out a small sneeze, which, because Tony was a tiger, wasn't actually small at all. A number of grazing birds leapt away in alarm, which Tony thought was a bit much. As the Grinch turned and caught sight of Tony, their face curled into a wonderful, awful, terrible smile. A tiny, treacherous voice in Tony's head said,
"It's good to be home."
The Grinch's fireplace always smelled strangely. Also, the flames were always green, for no reason Tony could discern. The Grinch had ushered him indoors immediately out of the cold. This was mostly, Tony suspected, because the Grinch never missed a chance to be bossy.
Sit there!
The Grinch had warned sternly.
And drink this. I have to go attend to this Munchkin hooligans.
Then they handed Tony a mug of something warm and suspicious and disappeared back to the cliffs. Tony sat on a squishy rocking chair by the fire. It was covered with a slight layer of grime, like everything the Grinch owned, and poked a finger experimentally into his drink. It was the color of chocolate, or possibly dirt. Something in it wiggled. The wind was howling lightly through the door. The wind on Mount Crumpet was almost always howls lightly, except when it is howling ferociously. Tony could hear the Grinch ordering the Little Who marching band about, helping them pack up their strange instruments and berating them in a weirdly affectionate way to be on time tomorrow, please. Cindy Lou, you are a vexation and a harridan. I never once thought otherwise. 3 o'clock sharp, please, or I'll use your noggins for soup bowls. The children seemed to find this funny. Tony was just about convinced he'd stepped into an alternate dimension and was considering upturning his mug of hot dirt into a rather depressed-looking ficus. And since when did the Grinch own a ficus? When the Grinch themselves came bursting into the room. They lounged on the doorframe for a moment, grinning broadly with crooked, yellow teeth.
Wow.
The Grinch drawled, pleased as anything.
Would you look at the cat who got dragged in? Tony, baby, you're an absolute mess. You look like you've gotten stampeded on by a herd of Hortons.
To himself.
Wait, did you say that? Oh, you did. I'm sorry.
I misread the line, but you can go ahead.
Okay. I've been here for 2 minutes, and you're already telling me how bad I look. That's got to be a record.
Nah.
The Grinch said, bounding onto a nearby sofa. It had exposed springs and a ridiculous amount of stuffing and bounced enthusiastically while the Grinch got seated.
I didn't say bad. I said messy, disheveled, bedraggled, a bit slapdash.
Oh, if that's all.
Tony didn't know why he was smiling so widely. It felt weirdly good to be back.
Now, what is going on with you and terrorizing a bunch of neighborhood children? And since when do they deliver themselves to your doorstep?
I
Said the Grinch, sounding very disappointed about it.
have not been terrorizing anyone.
That's what I mean. Since when do you not terrorize children? No, wait, since when do you make children giggle?
The Grinch sniffed, affronted.
I don't control what children giggle at. Believe me, I've tried. They're a bunch of hooligans. They don't experience terror, and they're too young to experience apathy. All that leaves, apparently, is an overwhelming curiosity about the world. Oh, and an unshakable youthful conviction in the goodness of others, yada yada, which is an exhausting attitude, obviously, and vaguely offensive to those of us who pride ourselves on instilling terror in our surroundings.
They sounded aggrieved on their own behalf.
Clearly.
Tony deadpanned, completely lost.
Yes.
The Grinch sniffed again.
Anyway, kids these days are too much for me. If I can't even terrify small children, it was time to retire, clearly.
Clearly.
Said Tony, still lost.
But of course, retirement leaves so many hours in the day. I'm a creative person. Being. Entity.
It was a pedantic argument whether the Grinch was or wasn't a person. Tony thought it was mostly a stupid argument. The important thing, he always thought, was that the Grinch was an inventive genius, and a bit of a maniac, and an astounding drama queen. And they made Tony laugh on days when he thought he'd never laugh again.
The point being,
Said the Grinch, waggling their eyebrows.
I get bored. Deeply bored. Existentially bored. I can't stand being bored. And now that I'm retired, I thought community service would help.
Community service?
Yes.
The Grinch said patiently, as if talking to a drooling hospital patient or a harmlessly demented person.
That's what retired people do.
Tony didn't point out that the Grinch had never had a job in their life because he was still stuck on the part about community service. He couldn't decide which part was more at odds with the Grinch, the community or the service bit.
This is bizarre.
Tony said, honestly. Said the Grinch.
Shut up and drink your tea.
Tea?
Tony honestly hadn't guessed. In fact, he didn't think it was likely at all.
This.
He said, pointing to the mug in his paw.
This is tea?
Oh, well, a type of tea.
Grinchy?
Oh, well, it comes from the ground.
Tony leaned over and carefully tipped the muddy substance into the potted ficus. Grinch chuckled, sounding pleased. The Grinch had made a lot of changes, in fact, since Tony was last here. Their cave, always bursting with half-finished, half-crazed inventions, was a little more clean than Tony had ever seen it, a little more empty. and the Grinch had retired, apparently, from terrorizing Whoville, which Tony had always assumed would be a lifelong passion. That was the strangest bit. There were other bits, too. The way the Grinch was a bit less, well, Grinchy. A bit less of a grouch, a tad less of a grumbler and a grouser. Tony found it all very strange. Part of it, of course, was that the Grinch was back in touch with their adoptive mothers. The Grinch had said it much in their letter, but now Tony got a fuller picture. A story about a reunion, a reconciliation, a bizarre Christmas heist, not in that order, and the way that those two wild old biddies were getting on in years, and could use someone big and strong and green around the house. It was sweet, honestly, if not a little bizarre, that the Grinch was returning to Whoville after all these years to look after Nana Clarnella and Nana Rose.
But how,
Tony asked, still absorbing this information,
does reuniting with your moms translate into you volunteering for the Christmas marching band?
he felt like he had missed something.
Oh,
Moaned the Grinch.
don't say that word. I can't stand the C word.
Thank goodness some things don't change,
This is bizarre,
Tony said, paw held over his eyes.
but at least you still hate the C word.
I've evolved.
The Grinch said.
Not had a complete personality transplant. Honestly.
Honestly.
Tony imitated. The Grinch pinched Tony right on the tip of his tail. Tony yanked it back, wincing. Didn't do to let one's tail wander like that, not around the Grinch.
The Who's and I
The Grinch said carefully.
have struck something of an accord over the years.
Tony snorted. Tony considered himself fairly easygoing, even if he sometimes cared a little too much about being well-liked. But even he couldn't stand the Who's. They were a cult of inbred extroverts, as far as he could tell. Emphasis on the cult-like tendencies. And the extroversion, any excuse to celebrate and make noise. Christmas was the worst. But Tony had made the mistake of visiting one year for Easter as well. As for the inbreeding, it was hard to tell in a town where everyone had the same surname. Tony had grown up in a Catholic family, an enormous Italian Catholic family, and even he thought someone could stage some sort of intervention.
They're really not that bad,
said the Grinch hesitantly, like they didn't quite believe it themselves. Tony snorted again. He'd never really forgiven the Who's for turning the Grinch into some sort of, well, movie villain outcast, even if the Grinch had leaned into it with an almost alarming amount of relish.
As long,
Tony said carefully,
as they don't make you wear a wig, you've got to draw the line at a Whoville-style wig.
Tony.
the Grinch said, grinning, but still smart enough not to open up that old can of worms. It was one of the first arguments they'd had back when they met nearly a decade ago and discovered how much fun it was to argue with each other. The Who's had a tendency towards astonishingly, earnestly humongous hairstyles, at least a foot high, even without the added bells and whistles, which sometimes included actual literal bells and whistles. Tony was convinced that they all wore elaborate wigs, while the Grinch swore they didn't. Tony had his doubts. Who on earth would actually go to all that effort first thing in the morning?
Hair extensions, then.
Tony would argue.
Or clip-ins. Toupees. I refuse to believe those things are real.
There are wooden frames,
The Grinch would say conversationally.
which some Who's keep in their bedroom so that they can sort of prop their necks up and sleep upright. To keep all the hair in the right place, you know?
At this point, Max ran into the room, woofing in a friendly manner. She was an old dog now, and didn't leap on Tony, but she did waggle up to him and lick his hand politely.
There she is!
Growled Tony, pleased.
Hello, old girl. Don't you look good?
He scratched her behind her ears, which he seemed to enjoy. Then another dog ran into the room, and another.
You?
Tony
You-
said to the Grinch.
You've got 3 dogs now?
It was hard to keep the excitement out of his voice. For a tiger, Tony was inordinately fond of dogs, a fact the Grinch had never failed to tease him for.
I know I've got 3 dogs. All right, ladies, introduce yourselves.
The dogs just looked at the Grinch, wagging their tails patiently.
I have to do everything. Well, Tony, you know I'm Maxie. And these new additions are Gus.
The Grinch pointed at the squat one with the funny eyes.
And Yodel A He Who.
Gesundheit.
Tony said loyally.
But I call them Yoo-Hoo for short.
I'm beginning to think the Who's have rubbed off on you.
Don't you dare.
Tony got on his hands and knees so he could pet multiple dogs at once. 3 dogs was, he decided, quite an improvement on 1 dog. The Grinch seemed to have made quite a lot of improvements.
Gus
The Grinch said smugly.
is short for Augustus.
Tony took a closer look at the smallest dog, a short, squat little bulldog who drooled agreeably. Upon closer examination, his eyes pointed in 2 different directions, like they were having a disagreement.
Isn't Augustus the mayor?
Ex-mayor.
Said the Grinch, still very smug.
He lost his re-election campaign. My grammar school sweetheart is running the city now. Did I ever tell you about my grammar school sweetheart?
I didn't know you ever went to grammar school.
Tony said honest.
Well, I did. It was awful. Our dear ex-mayor used to bully me over my beard.
The Grinch paused, stroking their green whiskers thoughtfully.
He must have been quite jealous.
I'm sure that's it.
Tony agreed.
Mm-hmm.
The Grinch hummed, still stroking their beards smugly.
So your grade school bully has lost an election and you've named a confused bulldog after him.
That's rude. The name is entirely a coincidence. And Gus here isn't confused. He's
The Grinch hesitated, finally at a loss for words.
just unhurried, is all.
Sure.
Tony said. Gus was in the process of chasing his own tail, but kept changing his mind about which direction to take.
Unhurried, sedate, leisurely paced, you might say.
Oh, hush.
Said the Grinch, examining their non-existent fingernails. They didn't bite their nails. They just had no fingernail beds. Their fingers were long and green and had at least 1 extra joint each. They were also quite furry, despite being sharp enough to cut glass. Tony found this fascinating.
Okay, this is a Tony line. As reassuring as it is that you can still be petty when you set your mind to it, I have to wonder how on earth you of all people got to be put in charge of a marching band.
Isn't it obvious?
The Grinch smirked.
I volunteered.
And then the Grinch swept out of the room to go change for dinner. The Grinch was a bit of a snob about changing for dinner. He always wore a fresh bathrobe. Dinner was, well, Tony wasn't sure what dinner was. When it came to the Grinch's cooking, it was generally best not to pay too much attention to the details. Some knowledge is best left unknown. There were greens, at least, which Tony suspected had come off a local shrubbery. And there were some oddly shaped objects that looked like roots, which were roasted and actually smelled quite edible. Tony focused on that, and not on the plate of gravel and broken glass. At least none of it was wiggling. Tony learned several incredible things over dinner. The first was that the Grinch was involved in all sorts of Whoville activities, which, okay, after the marching band thing, this was a bit less of a shock, but still, the Grinch was a community organizer, basically. The Grinch It had started as a part of an effort to clean up Mount Crumpet, which the Who's had been polluting for generations. And now that the Grinch mentioned it, Tony didn't know he'd failed to notice the sheer lack of stench. Mount Crumpet was famous for its stench. It was basically a solid physical thing, or at least it felt like one, when it was slapping you in the face. And now, well, the stench certainly wasn't gone, but Tony could almost taste his food over it. Not that tasting the food improved the overall dining experience, but still. The Grinch, as they told it, had sort of bullied the Who's into a community cleanup, and had gone on to invent several contraptions that efficiently broke down Whoville garbage. Just to keep Mount Crumpet clean, of course, just for their own personal satisfaction. From there, it was fairly simple to convert the detritus into mulch. The Grinch said mulch, in the way some people say words like erotic or moist. Mulch and clean energy, apparently, because what else was it going to be used for? The Grinch hated waste. And that was how the Grinch found himself accidentally operating a makeshift recycling plant turned nuclear power plant and supplying all of Whoville with sustainable energy.
It's not a nuclear power plant. It just uses fission.
That's nuclear energy, Grinchy. That is literally what nuclear power is.
You're being dramatic.
Which certainly explained why the Who's might be taking pains to keep the Grinch involved in the community. What was more interesting was the fact that the Grinch seemed to be playing along. This was a being who had previously become an actual, literal mountaintop hermit just to get away from their hometown. Things had certainly changed while Tony was gone. Previously, he would have assumed that the Grinch gained such a huge amount of power over the Whoville society would inevitably lead to them running amok as a sort of Monopoly Man villain, complete with hat and a monocle. The Grinch never did miss a chance to dress up. But that was before the Grinch had accidentally, and with utmost reluctance, as they told it, made friends with a few of the locals, and reunited with old family, and become an involuntary mentor to a few of the Who children. The whole thing was practically saccharine.
And, of course, your girlfriend's the mayor now.
Hush you.
The Grinch was mischievous, but they had never been malicious. And Tony had noticed they were always happier when they had a project. And now they had one. Well, mostly the Grinch just wanted to get on with life, in peace and quiet and the company of a few well-chosen friends. And if that meant improving the world along the way, then that was no one else's beeswax. And the Who's? The Who's were, well, the Who's meant well. Or some of them did. They were just misguided and a bit selfish and consumer-driven and noise-polluting. Oh, goodness, the noise. But perhaps they could change. The Grinch would be content just to have no more garbage dumped on their front lawn. Tony found the whole thing hilarious, if baffling. Mostly, the Grinch was making progress with their life, happy and maybe a little envious, but mostly just happy. He even tried a handful of gravel off the Grinch's plate. It was completely inedible. After dinner, they had a few bottles of beer by the fire. Well, Tony had beer, and passed the empty bottles to the Grinch, who chomped merrily on the bottlenecks. The Grinch appreciated the crunch. This gave Tony time to digest all he had learned, and, to a much lesser extent, dinner. He decided he was astounded with all the changes the Grinch had made, and said as much.
I'm astounded.
Tony said.
With all the changes you've made. No, honestly.
He said, when the Grinch made a dismissive little clicking sound with his throat.
I'm honestly impressed. Good for you. You've got... what's the phrase? You've got a new lease on life.
If you're going to speak in cliches, I'm leaving.
Said the Grinch, who never missed an opportunity to overuse cliches.
Hush you, I'm being serious.
I'm sure.
The Grinch said, munching on their bottle.
I like this one. Great texture, fruity undertones.
Tony, who had no way of knowing if glass could have fruity undertones, ignored them.
I'm trying to say I'm happy for you, you tit.
All right, Tiger, I could tell. Your tail's wagging.
It is not.
said Tony, steadfastly refusing to glance behind him. A tiger's tail does not wag.
Figuratively wagging. You're practically foaming at the mouth.
Tony wiped his chin furtively because he did actually have an issue with drool, the single drawback of fangs.
No, that's enough congratulations. I can't stand being congratulated. I'd much rather be quietly smug. Anyway.
The Grinch paused, looking embarrassed.
Anyway, I'm still me, and don't you dare think otherwise. Still mean and green with a soul full of gunk and all those lovely things. I've just made some changes, is all.
Well, it's a good look on you.
The Grinch raised an eyebrow and looked down at himself. They were wearing a feathered robe and a rather startling shade of pink.
The changes, I mean.
Yes.
The Grinch said simply, which was strange because they never missed a chance to tease Tony. It had been one of their favorite hobbies once upon a time. Tony felt oddly disappointed.
I suppose.
The Grinch said nonchalantly.
The therapy is actually helping.
Which is how the Grinch dropped a bombshell, and Tony learned another incredible thing, namely, that the Grinch, of all people, is in therapy.
I
Said Tony.
have questions. Am I allowed to ask questions? Is that something we do?
The Grinch spread their arms regally, draping their lacy sleeves over their chair like some sort of benevolent oligarch.
Ask away.
They commanded generously. Maybe it was the beer and the bottles. Maybe it was the green fire with its dubious flickering flames. Maybe it was because Tony was finally back again on Mount Crumpet, feeling relaxed and wanted and welcome in a way he hadn't in years. Maybe, just maybe, it was the tiny voice in his head whispering, "Home. This is what home feels like, you fool." Whatever the case, they stayed up well into the night, chattering and whispering, and then just sitting in silence, watching the fire go down. The embers gave a sputter here and there, coughing themselves back to life. Outside, the wind howled, whistling a merry tune of welcome.
Cool. Great, cool, great, cool.
Neat.
What the fuck?
That was so fucking
Right.
weird. I don't see us reading another chapter of that, but that was like both pretty well written and one of the weirdest things I've ever read.
Cool. That was thanks, Belmont. That was an experience. Merry fucking C word, everybody.
Yeah, it's fucking God.
And that does mean Christmas in this context before I get banned from Twitch.
God, yeah.